Buddy, I'm happy to have you with me again. That's great for Chapter 12 of Finding Atticus. Before we start, for those who are using this as their English language arts lesson, some vocabulary for you. We have chided, and chided means to kind of pick on someone, to give them a hard time about something. Simultaneously means something happens at the same time. Commenced means to begin. And mutual aid, in this case, in this story, there are mutual aid companies from fire departments, and that means that if a fire department has a fire call and they need help from somewhere else, then they call their mutual aid companies, which are fire departments from around that area who come in to help. So that's mutual aid when you hear that coming in. So I see that it's raining in Maine. It's nice and sunny here. I wish you could have the sun too. It's just chilly here. I think it might be in the low 40s at the most. So hold on to your seats today because Chapter 12 is a pretty emotional one. Chapter 12, Smokey's Initiation. Having made the decision to bring Atticus home, the sense of peace Jamie felt made the wet-down celebration even more enjoyable. There were hundreds of people gathered on the back and side lawns next to the firehouse for the barbecue. Smoke rose from the massive long cooking pit made from cinder blocks. Flames licked the hundreds of pieces of chicken that covered the grates. Her mouth watered from the aroma of the seasonings. Under two big tents were rows of tables and chairs that stretched the entire length of the lawn. In the middle was another table filled with salads of all kinds. Potato, macaroni, coleslaw, and fruit salads were complemented by baked beans, vegetable platters, and a dozen bags of chips. Jamie's favorite table was filled with every kind of dessert imaginable. She had already eyed the scotcheroos her grandmother was famous for. The peanut butter and crisp rice treat was special because of the chocolate and butterscotch topping. No one would go home hungry from this barbecue. Jamie joined several of the teenagers at the volleyball net. The group was competitive, diving for balls that nearly hit the ground and spiking viciously against the opponents. It wasn't nearly as physical as the men's matches, but in Jamie's estimation, they came in a close second. Various degrees of injuries were more common than not, and for some, a badge of honor. "Game point," announced Janet, the server from Jamie's team, as the ball flew like a missile just above the net. As the captain of the high school team, Janet's skill was unmatched in this game. The ball whizzed past several players and dropped just inside the line in the back. Jamie's team gathered for high fives, then left the sandy court so the next two teams could play. Sweat beads raced down the middle of her back as she dug into a large white cooler for a drink. "I wondered if I'd find you." She recognized the voice immediately. With her hand clamped around an ice-cold Gatorade, she spun around to greet Kyle Cody. "Oh, hi." Her stomach fluttered and her skin tingled. She squeezed the plastic bottle between her knees and then readjusted the ponytail tie in her hair. She couldn't imagine what her hair looked like at that moment. "I didn't know you were coming today." "I didn't know either," he said. "My mom read about it in the newspaper last night. Then when she found out we were friends, she thought we should come." Jamie smiled. "I'm glad you did." She removed the cap from the Gatorade, lifted the bottle to her lips, and took a long drink. A wave of self-consciousness swept through her. How unladylike did she look, soaked with sweat and swigging from a bottle. The last bit of Gatorade filled her throat like a stone, and she winced as it squeezed past her Adam's apple. She recapped the bottle and wrapped her fingers around it like it was a security blanket. "You're a pretty good volleyball player," Kyle said. Jamie smiled. "Thanks. We play at all the fire department picnics. Plus, we used to have family tournaments in our backyard with my dad." Kyle nodded. "Cool. I'd take you on my team anytime." "Thanks, again." Jamie glanced around nervously, wondering what to say next. She loved being around Kyle, but she hated how tongue-tied it made her. How did a girl know what to say? "Do you want something to drink?" Jamie asked. There's Gatorade and water and pop. Sure. Jamie turned and lifted the lid while Kyle made his selection. He took out a Gatorade like hers, opened it, and gulped down half of it. Ah, he said, lifting the bottle in the air. Hits the spot. With nothing else to say, they turned their attention to the new volleyball game in progress. Jamie tapped the orange plastic cap, wanting to drink more, but wondering how to drink it in a more feminine manner. It was Kyle who broke the silence again. Have you eaten yet? Jamie shook her head. Want to go and get something now? Okay. Stunning conversation, she chided herself. Why couldn't she think of something more intelligent to say? She and Kyle crossed the driveway toward the tents on the lawn. Her entire family, including Charlotte, was already seated around a table with heaping plates of food in front of them when Jamie and Kyle approached. Haley noticed them first. There was ketchup lining her mouth and a half-eaten hot dog was poised at her lips. Jamie, here's your seat. Haley patted the metal chair between her and their 8-year-old cousin Elizabeth. Then, noticing ketchup between her fingers, Haley licked it off. Jamie cringed, hoping Kyle hadn't noticed. I have a friend who's going to be eating with me, she said. Everyone's eyes lifted, and they stared at Kyle curiously. Uncle Craig instructed Elizabeth to move down one seat so 2 chairs were open next to Haley. Then he stood and reached across the table to shake Kyle's hand. I'm Jamie's favorite uncle, Craig. Kyle returned the handshake. Jamie felt her cheeks heat up. Oh, sorry, this is Kyle Cody. He's in my class at school. Jamie's mother rescued her from the uncomfortable moment. Why don't you two go and fill your plates? We can finish the introductions over lunch. When they returned and sat to eat, Jamie was relieved to see someone had cleaned up the ketchup Haley had smeared on the chair. Kyle immediately became engaged in an animated lacrosse conversation with Uncle Craig. It was a relief to be surrounded by her family right now, because they made it easy to have Kyle with them. They asked him questions and he shared information about himself. She sensed that they liked him, and the longer she sat with him, the more she did too. Grandpa Reston was in the middle of sharing a long joke when the firefighters' emergency pagers beeped simultaneously all across the lawn. It was something Jamie had grown up with. The pager would go off, and her father and uncle went into alert mode like bird dogs spotting a pheasant. All activity and conversation stopped at the tables, except for the firefighters jumping up for their places to run toward the firehouse. Guess Smokey gets an early jump into service, Craig announced as he pushed his chair back. Cover your ears, the county dispatcher will be setting off the air horn. The warning had barely crossed his lips when the deep bellow from the top of the firehouse commenced. There was one long blast, signaling a fire call rather than medical. Many of the younger children covered their ears while a few smaller ones wailed fearfully. Carl! Craig shouted to the firefighter closest to the firehouse. Cut the air horn. We're all here anyway. Dozens of firefighters dashed for the fire gear stored in vehicles or on racks in the station. A few had left their coats, boots, and helmets in the grass along the side of the building. Uncle Craig disappeared with the group through one of the open bay doors. The air horn started to blow again, but broke off abruptly. Other than the echo of the blast coming from the hills, there was silence. Then the dispatcher's voice boomed over the speakers in the firehouse. Yates County Dispatch to Keuka Shores fire monitors. Respond to a possible woods fire between Perkins Road and Dobson Hill. Caller reports a large column of smoke in the area. Roger, dispatch, a deep voice answered. A retired firefighter sitting at the next table leaned back in his chair and tapped Jamie's grandfather. Hey, Ed, isn't that out in your direction? Her grandfather nodded. Hopefully it's nothing much. As dry as it's been for the last month, the man said. In these conditions, even a little fire can grow into a monster in no time. The diesel engines roared to life. Uncle Craig climbed into the cab of Smokey. In rapid succession, the drivers of the trucks signed on the air while they waited for the cabs to fill with other firefighters. T-64 responding. Forestry 64 responding. E-64 responding. Finally, Uncle Craig signed the new truck on the air. Pumper 64 responding. Despite the seriousness of the moment, the crowd cheered. He smiled and waved through the massive windshield. The first truck was rolling down the ramp when the dispatcher came back on. With the loud truck engines, it was difficult to hear the transmission. Someone next to Jamie's grandfather turned up a scanner and held it in the air for everyone to hear. They caught the last part of what the dispatcher was saying. Be advised, the second caller is reporting the location to be in the area of the abandoned scout camp. Best access is off County Line Road. No! Jamie screamed. Uncle Craig rolled Smokey down the ramp and yelled out the window. Dad, the fire's in the woods out behind your house. Jamie leaped up from her chair, knocking it over. It clattered into a heap behind her. Her feet tangled in the chair's legs and she tripped and fell, falling on her face. The force of her fall caused her teeth to gnash together. Bits of rock jabbed into her cheek and became embedded in her palms. Ignoring the pain, she struggled to free her feet and get up. Jamie, what's wrong? Her mother shouted over the noise of the trucks. One by one, their sirens screamed to life as they approached the street. Out of the corner of her eye, Jamie saw Kyle rise from his chair, looking confused. Grandpa Reston rushed down the aisle on the other side of the table. People all around them stared at the commotion. Jamie kicked free of the chair and got up, charging after her grandfather. Grandpa, she shrieked, wait for me! He was running toward his silver truck in the parking lot. She careened through the crowd, ignoring her mother's calls to stop. She had to go with her grandfather. Jamie yanked open the truck door and jumped in the passenger seat as her grandfather yanked the driver's door shut. He was breathing heavily, and he leaned forward over the steering wheel for a moment. Jamie, he gasped, you have to stay here. No, Grandpa, you don't understand. Her grandfather took his scanner out from under the truck's seat, turned it on, and then slid it onto the dash before starting the truck's engine. The chief signed on the air. Jamie's mother reached the truck and pulled open the door. Jamie, get out of that truck now, she ordered. No, Mom, I have to go. Why? Atticus is in the woods. You don't know that, her mother countered. We don't know where he is. Jamie's hands and legs began to shake. Her mind raced with images of fire sweeping over Atticus, just like the nightmares she'd had about her father. I do know, Mom, she cried. I hid him in the cabin in the woods. What? Her mother's eyes widened in disbelief. Jamie turned to her grandfather. Hurry, Grandpa, we have to get him out. Her voice rose with her panic. Please. Her mother grabbed her arm and leaned into the truck in front of her. Jamie, what have you done? Mom, Jamie cried, please just let us go before it's too late. Atticus could die just like Dad. She hadn't meant to say that, but it flowed out with her fear. Her mother stumbled back and slammed the truck door. She clutched her stomach with her arm and covered her mouth with her shaking hand as tears sprang to her eyes. Charlotte jogged across the parking lot toward her. Jamie's lips trembled. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Her apology choked her, and she struggled to breathe. Her grandfather backed out of the parking space, then threw the truck into drive and slammed down on the accelerator. The tires spun and then squealed before finding traction. Then they shot across the parking lot. Jamie turned and watched her mother and Charlotte out the rear window. Her mother melted against Charlotte as if all strength had been sucked from her. Charlotte wrapped an arm around Jamie's mom and supported her as they hurried back toward the station. Oh, Grandpa, what have I done? Jamie sobbed. It was all she could say. She couldn't bear to look at him, so she turned her face toward her window, and the dam behind her eyes burst. She fought the noises that gurgled in her throat. How could she ever face any of them again? What was going through her grandfather's and mother's minds right now? How could she have been so selfish? When she'd taken Atticus, she had convinced herself it was for him and Mr. Hubbard and the rest of the residents at Shady Nook. The truth was so clear to her now. She hadn't done it for them. This had all been about her and what she wanted. The others were just pawns she'd used to justify her plan. On the outskirts of town, she heard her grandfather mutter a swear word. She whipped toward him, stunned. He never talked like that around her. Then she saw what had caused his reaction. A huge cloud of brown smoke filled the horizon. Oh, Atticus, Atticus, she moaned. Her heart hammered against her rib cage. She stared in stunned disbelief as the smoke rose straight up, then at a certain point curled in the wind current and spread in the opposite direction. It was the most frightening thing Jamie had ever seen. Hurry, Grandpa, please go faster, she begged. I'm going as fast as I can, he snapped. We're no good to anyone if we get in an accident. The scanner on the dash crackled. T-64, Forestry 64, approaching County Line Road. Roger, T-64 and Forestry 64. Use the access road into the campsite. Be aware of large ruts. A siren wailed behind them. Her grandfather slowed and pulled toward the side of the road. The chief's car sped past them, followed quickly by Tag Bentley in the sheriff's car. When they'd passed, her grandfather pulled back onto the road and accelerated again. Every bump, every pothole jostled them. E64 to car 164. Where will you have us, Chief? The chief's response was inaudible over the small scanner. Roger that. P64, your call. Again, there were scratchy voices, but Jamie couldn't understand them. What are they saying? She asked. I don't know, her grandfather answered. The reception on this little scanner isn't good out here away from the antenna. He craned his neck forward as he concentrated on the road and maneuvering around the deepest holes. Jamie thrust her thumb between her teeth and gnawed on the nail. Her hand shook, and the truck bounced erratically over potholes, jarring her. Between the two, her thumb slipped and the thumbnail jammed into the gum above her teeth. She gasped and pressed her hand to her mouth to stem the pain. When her grandfather didn't slow down to take the turn onto County Line Road toward the scout camp, Jamie turned in surprise. Where are you going? Home. But the fire is being blown in the direction of my farm. He pointed toward the sky. You see the way that column of smoke is blowing? She stretched forward in her seat and nodded as she looked up. That's the wind direction, which means the fire is being pushed in that direction. Going to the scout camp will bring us on the wrong side of that fire, Jamie. If it hasn't reached the cabin already, I can tell you that's where it's headed. A crazy mixture of hope and fear gripped her. Then the fire department needs to come this way. We need to go tell them. Maybe they can keep the fire from reaching the cabin. Jamie, your Uncle Craig knows these woods better than anyone around these parts. If that's the best way to attack the fire, then he's already directed them there. But if he didn't think of it, her grandfather, normally very patient, pinned her with a look that told her to stop or else. She curled back into the seat and hung her head. This was all a nightmare. She was certain at any moment her mother would shake her awake and none of this would be true. The chatter on the fire scanner suddenly picked up, but the voices cut in and out. Jamie leaned across the seat and strained to catch the words. Extends past the pond. Can't get by the path. The transmission was so broken up it made no sense. The next voice, a man, sounded breathless, like he was either moving fast or excited. Too far in. By foot. Mutual aid. More Indian cans. Then someone shouted into the radio, Get a chainsaw in here now! Jamie glanced at her grandfather. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his fingers were turning white. Silently, she begged him to go faster. Jamie could hear more sirens in the distance, and then she realized they were coming from behind. She swiveled in the seat and watched as Smokey crested the hill, then passed them. Following close behind, another truck eased past her grandfather's vehicle, which he'd pulled off to the side. A few hundred feet down the road, both fire trucks turned into her grandparents' driveway. They're coming to this side of the woods. Jamie didn't know whether to be happy or frightened. Did it mean they were going to try and stop the fire from this side, or that it had already burned its way through the woods? She stared out her window again. The plume of smoke above the woods had grown significantly in the last few minutes. She could see that the wind was pushing it in their direction. More trucks signed on as responding, and she recognized them as mutual aid companies from nearby departments. Was the fire so bad that they needed that much help, or was it a precaution? Jamie's palms suddenly stung. She looked down to see she'd clenched her hands so tightly that her fingernails had dug deep into the skin. Pebbles from her fall at the station dotted her hand. She dug them out with her fingernail, then flexed her fingers and rubbed her hands together. Hold on, she told herself. We're almost there. I'm coming, Atticus. Her grandfather pulled the truck into the driveway and drove it onto the yard under the big tree. You wait here, he commanded as he opened his door. I'm going to stand out by the road to direct in the mutual aid trucks. Jamie watched him jog to the end of the driveway, then alternately look up and down the road. She turned her attention toward the field behind the barn. The 2 fire trucks that had passed them were bouncing through the field. By the route they were taking, Jamie knew Uncle Craig was taking them toward the path that he and her father had made into the woods. She glanced back at her grandfather. He had his back to her as he continued his watch. Then she looked behind her toward the smoke that created an ugly dark cloud above the trees. The acrid odor was beginning to filter in on the breeze. There was no way she could sit in the truck and wait for someone to maybe discover Atticus in the cabin. It was her fault he was in danger. It was her responsibility to get him out. She opened the truck door carefully, making as little noise as possible. Once she was out, she closed it softly and then crouched behind the side of the truck. When she reached the tailgate, she scooted toward the tree and ducked behind its massive trunk. Her chest muscles tightened, and it was difficult to take a full breath. "Relax," she whispered to herself as she released the air from her lungs. "Just relax." She peered around the tree. Her grandfather still had his back to her. Taking in a bolstering breath of her confidence, she stepped away from the tree and crossed the driveway to the woodshed. She lifted the latch and stepped inside. She glanced toward the wall next to her grandfather's workbench. There she saw exactly what she was looking for: her father's old fire coat and helmet. She lifted them from the hooks where they'd hung for years. They were big, bulky, and heavy, but they were better than nothing at all. Jamie hooked the helmet strap over one arm and carried the coat under the other one. She peeked out the woodshop door to be sure her grandfather hadn't discovered her missing yet. He was still focused on the road, so she slipped out the door and made her way past the side of the barn. When she reached the path beyond, she took off at a full sprint toward the opening in the woods. She couldn't let Atticus die the way her father had. That's the end of chapter 12. We'll read chapter 13 tomorrow. I'm sorry to leave you on that kind of a cliffhanger. And again, for those who are using this as their English language arts, I have 3 questions for you, 3 things to think about. First, Jamie had to admit to her mother that she had taken Atticus. How do you think this admission made her mother feel? Discuss Jamie's decision to go into the woods, knowing the fire was coming toward the cabin. What are some things that could happen because of that decision? And finally, this is another situation where Jamie is making a decision with her heart and not her head. When someone does this, they think it's the right thing to do, but it's not. Have you ever made a decision that afterward you realized was a bad one? Think about that and compare that to Jamie's. I'd like to leave today with a birthday shout out to my friend Susan. It's her birthday today, April 2nd. So happy birthday, Susan. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you tomorrow at 1:30.